Here we go. Welcome to the Doug TeNapel channel. I'm Doug TeNapel. We're here in Exile, where all the happy patriots are. We serve the Lord, and we have a special guest, William Allen, who is a fellow Christian, and he has a very unique story. I want to first start by showing his book on Amazon. And this is, I think, probably the most important thing I'm going to do today, is many of you are going to need this book. So look, his book is called Not Man Enough to Be a Woman on Amazon. Transgendered for 30 years, no lie lives forever. So then he detransitioned. And I'm only bringing that up because many of us all know someone with a sexual identity disorder or a problem, and they might need some Christian help through it, or you might need some Christian wisdom on how to navigate that. You can get this book. The link is in the description. You click on it and it'll take you to the Amazon page and you can buy it. Not Man Enough to Be a Woman. And we have author here, William Allen. How are you?
Doug, I'm well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
It's good. I think this is going to be the greatest show I've ever done, probably. There's some pressure.
I've been getting that a lot lately from other people, yeah.
So I first found out about you, I think yesterday or the day before. There was someone asking about, kind of your testimony, or when did you figure out about the trans thing? And you gave an incredible testimony. I don't want to go over the whole thing. I have very specific things to ask about, though. You are born a biological male, but you lived as a woman for 30 years. What 30 years was that? When was that? Both your age and the years.
I transitioned in 1993. I was early 30s, and my detransition was complete in October of 2023. Okay. So I've been detransitioned just over a year.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
There and back again, like Bilbo.
It's been a crazy life.
So I have so many questions, and the reason why I'm asking you really is, I have an opinion on the subject. You have an opinion on the subject. I'm not allowed to even give my opinion on things about trans, say, unless I have that, what they call lived experience.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, unless I've done that. Well, you live the experience, so let them. I like kind of fighting liberals or leftists with their own ideology, because they're not allowed to negate your experience by their rules. Of course they will.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. What first, I know I'm from the art community, so I know a lot of trans people, but all of them said they felt like they were like a female in a man's body or something like that. And you said something about that even in your testimony. Tell me about your earliest memory of when you first felt the female thing happening as a male growing up.
It was the first thing I can ever remember in my life as a child, probably 4 or 5 years old. This is back in the 60s, the 1960s, sure. Keep in mind.
I was born in 66, so I was right there.
All right. So you're coming up on it. So, I remember many a night crying myself to sleep, wishing that I had been born a girl, and praying that God would change me in the middle of the night. Now, I don't know why I felt that way. I don't know what the genesis of that behavior or those desires was. If you had known me then, I was just like any other 60s boy growing up in America, riding bikes, playing cowboys and Indians, getting in trouble, climbing trees, building forts, Boy Scouts, the whole thing. And nobody would have ever guessed. But I had my own secret time, getting in my head and also dressing up. Mm-hmm. Now, just outside my bedroom was a walk-in closet that my parents put all their old clothes in. And, a lot of kids, they play dress up. But I was dressing up in mom's clothes, not dad's. Uh-huh. So I did that, and I knew it was wrong.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so I never told anybody. I kept it
You knew it
secret.
was wrong because you'd get in trouble with your parents, or you had a moral conscience that
No,
was telling you this is wrong?
something was telling me this wasn't right. I knew I shouldn't be feeling this way. I knew there were boys and there were girls. I had boy friends and friends that were girls. I had boy cousins and girl cousins, and I knew I was a boy. I knew my mother was a girl. I knew my father was a boy. Uh, I wasn't yet aware of all the biological differences yet, but I knew there were differences. And with what I knew, for some reason, I wanted to be a girl. Now, I'm not going to say I felt like a girl. And throughout my life, I've heard people say, "Oh, I felt like a girl trapped in a man's body or a woman trapped
Yeah.
in a man's body." And I always thought that was kind of corny.
Yeah.
I get the sentiment, but I didn't feel that way. And of course, today I think about that, and and just using logic, how could you say something like that? If you're a man, how in the world do you know what it feels like to be a woman? How
Right.
can you say you can't?
At best, you
And
can know
and
what
vice
a
versa.
man's opinion is of being a woman.
Right,
Yes.
right. And so I, even when I got closer to transitioning, and once I already had transitioned, uh, I never said any of the things that we hear today. Things like trans women are women. I mean, that's just stupid.
Men can
I was
breastfeed and
never,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, and
I
that's
was
kind of why
never.
I don't want to address where the lunacy has gone, because I
Hmm,
really
hmm.
think it started where you started,
Yeah,
which is I'm a 5-year-old feeling like I wish I could be a girl.
yeah, yeah.
You know, I think that's, and then all of what's happening over the last 30 years, or that's
Hmm.
just our society's choice to decide to ride with that postmodern personal feeling or sentiment. If I felt like I was a dog, or if I felt like I wanted to leave my wife, you know, for another woman, a younger
Hmm.
woman, it's like that, you know, if the law jumped into it and made that the new good, which it kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
does,
yeah.
you know, personal happiness and all that. We'll get into all that too. I have one more question, because on while we're in your youth, because all of the other trans people that I know have talked about being screwed up from when they were very young. Were
Mhm.
there other psychological problems that happened that weren't just about the sexual identity, but other things that came about throughout your youth and your teens? Or is it
Yeah.
just the trans issue?
I am not aware of anything. Now,
Okay.
I've talked to others, and a lot of them report some sort of sexual abuse in childhood or some other stories
But
of things
like
happening.
no eating disorders, no
No,
depression,
no,
schizophrenia,
no.
you know, okay, that's
I didn't have any of that. At
interesting.
least not that I'm aware of. I was raised in a loving home. Uh, we were churchgoers. Um, my father, uh, he was a disciplinarian, and
Yeah, mine too.
and yeah, but he did a good job raising me,
Yeah,
and he
it's
exposed me to a
wonderful.
lot of sports, music, all sorts of sciences, various things. Growing up at different points in my life, and uh, so I have no complaints. Now we had our moments. It was kind of a love hate thing because I got into a lot of trouble as a kid, and I was just ornery. That was just my nature, and so like I said, he didn't suffer fools much well at all. So I got punished a lot, and
Do you think um, your parents' response and their discipline of you, instead of agreeing with the trans thing, might have been, and raising you in the faith, might have been what also helped you in your detransition, that you had uh, a island home to go home to, kind of in philosophy? Or did that not play into it at all
no,
because you?
no. Now, at best, what I can say is that my parents were churchgoers, and I was raised up in the Methodist Church,
Oh
and
my, yeah,
they kind of went around the bend last year, didn't they?
yeah, they went south.
Yeah, but you know, I was baptized as a baby. Of course, you know that's there's a lot of debate about that, but
Yeah, yeah.
But, you know, and at 7 years old, I think I was confirmed, and I didn't even understand what that was. And but I came up going to Sunday school, going to the services, and when I got older, I was in the youth group, uh, choir, all sorts of things. And then even as an adult, you know, I went to church and I gave to the church.
Did your peers before you transitioned think you were effeminate or gay, or
No,
just treated you completely
no,
normal?
no, no. In fact, when it came out, when I was telling people what I was going to do, family and friends, I mean, they were stunned. They didn't expect this. It's the last thing they expected.
Okay, I love when your experience blows away my expectations and my norms, because it makes you open up your philosophy to
Hmm.
accept those things. So I think that's
Yeah,
very cool.
yeah.
So now you transition at 30, in your 30s or whatever, in 93. And what, I guess, I guess, why did you choose the things that you chose to start becoming a woman? Like you'd choose, say, I'm going to wear pumps, or I'm going to wear a dress, or I'm going to take these hormones. You were convinced that they would do what?
Well, growing up, you know, through elementary school and high school and everything, I was always straight. I was never gay. I mean, I
Hmm.
dated girls in high school and
You
in
wanted to be a
college.
girl. You weren't attracted to men.
Yeah, right.
Hmm.
And that was something that didn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, I loved women, and yet I wanted to be one. I mean, that
Hmm.
was just something that was not computing in my
Hmm.
head.
Hmm.
And in college, I was studying computer science, but I also started taking some psychology classes, thinking I'm going to figure this out. And there was only one class. There was like one paragraph devoted to it in
Yeah.
one book, and that was it. Because
It's a soft science,
they
William.
didn't
It's a
know.
soft
Yeah,
science.
it's one of the most. I know enough about psychology to know that it's one of the most inexact sciences there is.
It's the most
Oh
soft
yeah, yeah,
science.
yeah. So uh, after college, I moved out to the Pacific Northwest, and up until that point, almost, I really didn't even know that there was anyone else in the world like me.
Interesting.
I thought I was the only one. Now, keep in mind, this is back in the '70s and early '80s, right? And we didn't have the internet. And
Yeah.
once I got out to the Northwest, I stumbled on an ad somewhere or something that was mentioning a support group meeting for people like me.
Uh-huh.
It mentioned transsexuals and transvestites. Those were really the only two terms we had back then.
That's right.
And so I found this group, and man, I was amazed to find out that there's others like me, and just to be able to talk with people. And we had shared experiences and desires, and that was just such a relief.
Yeah.
Uh, and
Because before that, you thought you were the only
oh
one.
yeah, yeah. And I
And
went to
that's,
great efforts to keep it secret. You
yeah.
know, I was always sneaking around, and I had a wardrobe, you know, a female wardrobe stashed
Yep.
away in a footlocker, locked up all the time. And yeah, uh, it was a lot of
I had
effort.
a roommate in the late 80s, and we found his dress. Uh, I knew another programmer. It's funny that you're a computer programmer. He was a
Mhm.
programmer in video games, and he would wear a dress to work and had a
Really?
female name. How important is it, I guess, to that experience? Would you ever wear pants again, or was it always like once you switch to that, you have to wear the dress?
Well, when I was in my own fantasy world, when I was having my private time, yeah, I mean, I was wearing dresses and all the underclothes and everything. Sure, I had wigs, yeah,
Yeah.
but uh, strange thing
And you
happened.
would not enjoy yourself alone unless you did that. Is that right? Were
Right, right,
you were
yeah,
that's when you were comfortable in your own skin, is when you.
yeah, yeah, and it wasn't something that uh, I was doing all the time on my off time. I mean, I still had to go to work and earn a living, and I still would go to church and had other activities outside of work. But when I was at home on a regular basis, and it wasn't every night, but fairly regularly, um, I would take that time to dress up and just kind of imagine myself as that person, as a female, and it seemed to give me some relief. Because if I didn't do that, if I didn't give it some attention now and then, it got to be pretty overwhelming. It was hard to think about anything else, and it would interfere with my work.
Right. Now that's the statement of an addict. Did you
Yeah.
ever try to not do it for a certain period of time?
Oh yeah. Oh, many times. Yeah. Yeah.
So it
And that
was
just made it
something you
worse.
tried to give up
Yeah.
and count the days.
And
then
listen,
you just,
and I prayed about it too.
uh-huh.
Now, since early in my life, I've had a belief in God and
Sure.
Jesus, and my parents and others always told me that Jesus died on the cross for your sins. And I had heard that just as nonchalantly as I just said it to you. And so that's how it resided in my head. It wasn't any more important to me than my job or a favorite sports team. It was just a thing, but it was always there. And I never doubted it. And I just always assumed, because I had said that sinner's prayer, that I was saved. And yet I still continued.
So when you went without dressing up,
Mm-hmm.
and then you did go running back to dress up, did you see that as a sin and confess that and feel guilty about it? Or did you defend it? Because that's kind of a difference where our culture's at now. Do you defend it and say, that was my identity?
I don't think I did either. I didn't feel guilty. There were times when I did pray and ask God to just take that away from me, because it was interfering with my life. But I also didn't, I mean, there was nobody to defend it to, only myself at the time. But I didn't really even do that. I didn't see it as a big stumbling block in my life, as far as salvation is concerned. Now, so all those years, I mean, I know now that I was a false convert.
Sure.
At key points in my life, I would sit down and kind of reassess my life, like say when I graduated college, or when I was going out on my own, or when I was going to get married. I'd sit down and think about things, and I'd realize I had not been really saved. And so I'd sit down and I'd pray hard, and ask Jesus to come into my heart. Basically that sinner's prayer, what I'd heard so many pastors say before. And nothing happened really that I know of. Nothing changed. I didn't feel different. Nothing in my life was different. I kept doing the same things I had been doing all my life. So
yeah, you kept going back to that.
Yeah. And so I just, and there's even a pastor in my family, an uncle, and of course I never talked to them about this issue, but I did talk to them a couple times about what it means to be saved, and they tried to explain it to me, but I didn't get it. And certainly any pastors or any churches that I had gone to, they weren't preaching the true gospel.
Did you go to Christians, when you went to services, did you go to, like, you sang in the choir? Did you participate in like Christmas shows, Christmas cantata? Did you do all of the foot washing that they all do? Did you sing the worship songs and feel the worship in your heart?
Well, in some instances you can get emotional when they're using a lot of music.
But you felt the emotions. You felt emotions.
Yeah, but looking back on it, I think it was kind of contrived. I think it was they're just trying to stimulate emotions because they're making it a big production. It's got production value, and they're stimulating emotions.
But I'm saying that you experienced emotions that are normal for Christians or non-Christians. But I'm saying your emotions, you experienced them. It doesn't prove anything. It just shows that you had the experience, right? You weren't distant from the church. You just were maybe not saved.
Yeah, I wasn't. No, I wasn't distant from the church. But yeah, looking back now, I know I wasn't saved. I didn't know it then. I thought I was.
Did you read the
And
Bible?
I had tried to read the Bible several times, and it was a tough read, and it
Heck yeah.
just didn't speak to me really. It didn't make much sense. And
What about your prayer life? Did you pray all the
yeah,
time to this
no,
God?
not all the time. No, no, maybe once a week, if that. Sometimes when I go to bed and I'm trying to get to sleep, I'll maybe
Yeah.
say something.
So what we'd call kind of a minimal casual Christian, right? I mean, it was something that you went back to your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
It just wasn't saturating every moment of your life,
No.
maybe the way it is now, fully present
Mm-hmm.
all the time. The word is present in
Mm-hmm.
your head,
Mm-hmm.
and better theology now than then.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me get back to your transition. What drugs did you take? They had you on some kind of.
Well, let's back up a little bit. There was something that happened before that.
Okay, okay.
So one day I met a girl on an airplane, and at the end of the flight, I was headed to a family reunion, and at the end of the flight, I realized I had just met the girl I'm going to marry. And it turns out that when I found out later, when she got to where she was going, she had told her family she just met the guy she was going to marry.
Oh, wow.
So within a year, we were married. And during this time, all these compulsions that I'd had that were so irresistible, they went away.
Oh, wow.
Right. And I had been praying for it. And I was grateful. Yeah. I mean, it's because things were replaced. You know, my attention was replaced with this woman, a godly woman, with love.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
And
that love is real.
yeah. Well, and I thought this was it. You know, we're going to live happily ever after and raise kids. And yeah, this was great. After about 2 years of this marriage, though, this my nemesis came back. This uninvited compulsion that I had, and it reared its ugly head, and with a vengeance. And I could not suppress it anymore. And it got to the point where, I mean, she could tell something was up.
She was going to find out soon. Yeah,
Man.
You could only hide that so long.
Yeah, yeah. So,
but
and I didn't love her any less.
To people who leave other professions or sinful acts, it might be lust and pornography. It might be drugs. It might be whatever that thing is that you thought marrying a good woman was going to clean up. A woman is not Jesus. She's a good thing. She's a great thing. But she can't do what needs to be done. And it didn't. And so you had something else maybe to momentarily obsess on, a wonderful marriage and a wonderful woman. But even that was not what it took to cure whatever was wrong with you.
Right, right. And I feel awful about it too, because she didn't deserve this. I mean, she pinned her hopes on me. She wanted me to father her children. And I really let her down. And I just feel awful about that. So it obviously ended up in divorce, and just under 3 years from the time we were married. And at that time, I had been working on our house, been remodeling it, and she had already moved out. So I was trying to finish that up before I moved out so she could sell it. And there was a time there I got really depressed. I mean, I just lost my wife and losing my house. I was losing everything, really. And it got bad. There was a period of 5 nights in a row that I sat in our spare bedroom after working on the house during the day. But I sat in the spare bedroom with a gun pointed at my head. And it was rough. And I got to the point where I did try to pull the trigger. And for some reason, it wouldn't go off. And it wasn't a malfunction. It was like there was this equal and opposite force pushing against my finger as I was trying to pull the trigger. Now, I don't know if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or if it was divine intervention, or what.
Or both.
Or both.
I'll take either one.
Yeah. So.
But what the point is, you were there. You saw that as maybe your only option out.
Yeah. And, you know, I've heard about other people. I know other people that have committed suicide,
Mm-hmm.
and people that have attempted it. And a lot of people will make presumptions about committing suicide, how it's the easy way out,
Mm-hmm.
or uh, the cheap way, or it's going against God or whatever. But man, I tell you, there is a pain that is so great and so overwhelming that you see suicide as the only way out. You look at it as a hand coming down from wherever and giving you relief. And I've been there, and I used to criticize people that would think about suicide or actually make attempts. I don't anymore. I get it.
Yeah.
And so to those of you that would think about people that way, please don't. It's
I judge it as wrong, but
mm,
I know enough. You know, I have a very close cousin who committed suicide, and it has been said, because he was a family man and a cop, it has been said that if he was in his right mind, he wouldn't have pulled that trigger,
mhm, mhm,
and he did pull that trigger.
mhm. I think that's a
So
key point. In his right mind, and I was not in my right mind
yeah.
at the time. Yeah. So after that attempt, time went on. We were divorced. I was still working, um, and after a couple 3 years, I found another support group meeting for trans people in the town I was living in, and uh, I kind of went back to my old behaviors.
Uh-huh.
And I realized at that point that I'm never going to be rid of this thing,
Sure.
because I had prayed for it so many times and
Sure.
wanted it to just go away. I just wanted to
Sure.
lead a normal life. And but I started to see transitioning. Once I actually realized transitioning is a thing, up until the 80s, I didn't even know that was possible. And I started looking at that as really my only way of staying alive.
Mhm.
Because if I concluded on my own that if I didn't do this, I was going to wind up dead pretty soon.
Right. Right.
And going into it as a false convert, as a Christian or somebody who thought he was a Christian, even
Sure.
with that, I knew it wasn't right. I knew that God would not approve of this, but I did it anyway.
Okay.
And to get back to the question you were asking, I had to. Well, I experimented first just by going to the meetings on femme, they used to call it, and just dressed up as a woman. And
Uh-huh.
man, I got a lot of compliments. I was pretty good at the presentation. And a lot of the other people there's a lot of people that just looked like dudes in dresses. And they looked pretty
Minimal
silly.
effort.
Yeah.
Minimal effort.
Well, there were some that with maximum effort, they'd still look like dudes in dresses. And
I'm sorry for laughing, but
no,
is
it's
funny.
okay. It's okay. The first time I walked in to the meeting and saw these people, I honestly, I kind of wanted to laugh too. But
Uh-huh.
um,
But you got at what they were getting at.
yeah, yeah. But there was a small number of them there that passed.
Mhm.
Okay, and I mean, you just couldn't tell. And yeah, even a smaller number of them, when they spoke, you couldn't tell. Now, most of the ones where you couldn't tell physically, as soon as they opened their mouth, you could tell the jig was up.
Yeah.
And I talked to those people, the ones that even had the good voices, and they said, "Well, I went to a voice coach." I said, "Really? Okay." So I got that as a referral, and I started going to a voice coach. And within just a few sessions, I was able to alter my voice. I learned how to control that and sound female.
Sure.
It's possible.
Sure.
Uh,
And so we have you in private dressing up,
mm,
and that's good enough for you. But you don't talk and you don't hear your voice. So doing the voice coach and presenting better or presenting well and believably, that's about other people, right? So
well, at the time, it was about me.
was it about
that
you
actually,
to hear your own voice sound
Oh,
like
yeah.
a woman was
Yeah.
going to make you feel better?
Yeah. And I even recorded it
Okay.
and listened to it back. And yeah, so it was giving me hope.
Mhm.
Because like I said, if I didn't do this, I was going to wind up dead. And I didn't want to go through it and then still just look like a dude in a dress. I didn't want people to notice. Now, see, back in my day, when we did this, back in the old ages, all we wanted to do was transition, blend into society, and get on with life. Very
Yeah,
unlike
and
what we
you
see
didn't,
today.
because you couldn't have cultural approval then either. If you didn't do a good job of it, everyone would go, look at that
Right.
freak in a dress. They may say
Right.
that today, but overall culture is going to say,
Yeah.
you're a hero today.
Yeah, that's what culture does say. A lot of it. But
Today. I'm just saying
Today.
it's very different.
Mm-hmm.
You transitioning in 93 versus 2024.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very different culture that you're stepping in. You might even get job offers,
Mm-hmm.
promotions today.
Mm-hmm. Well, and of course, at the time in '93, I was gainfully employed as an engineer. So that was a big deal, and I had to figure out, what am I going to do? Am I going to leave the company, or am I going to try to transition on the job? So those were questions that would come soon.
Don't you find that engineers, though, and computer guys are more libertarian leaning, and they're less likely to be as judgy as other fields? Do you think they would have thrown you out?
No. Well, I did actually wind up transitioning on the job, and found a lot of support there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my suspicion.
Yeah.
I mean, every trans person I worked with, you just kind of go, yeah, I disagree, but you do a great job. Let's get some work done. Let's make some profits.
Well, keep in mind, I was in Seattle. This was in yeah. So this is the Pacific Northwest, a liberal bastion of
Patient zero. That's right. It's the hot zone.
Yeah, liberal central. So I did find a lot of acceptance there. But yeah, you had asked about how I began the transition. Yeah, I had to find a new medical doctor. It was the whole process was very closely monitored, and she put me on a drug to counteract the male hormone called spironolactone, and also put me on estrogens. And things started to happen. It took a few weeks, but over time, it's some pretty big differences. Softens the skin, softens the hair. I grew breasts. Fat redistributes. And the mindset that I was in at the time, oh man, I was happy. It was euphorious. This stuff that was happening to me.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, I'm going to be living out my dream, my lifelong dream. And so it came time to start telling people. And I had to tell my family. And I flew home at the tail end of 1993. Or no, 92, sorry, to Florida for Christmas. And told my mom and dad. And
holy moly.
Boy, did not go well.
Yeah.
And my father, he was proud of his boy. I was an Eagle Scout. That's my boy. Proud of my boy. Just made Eagle Scout.
Successful engineer. Huge.
I was the first one in the family line, in the named family line, to get a college degree.
Yep.
And they paid as much as they could, and I worked full time, multiple jobs, and got myself through college. And I was the first one to do that. That's my boy, college graduate. I got a pilot's license, something that he had taken flying lessons too in his youth and always wanted to, but never got around to it. And my boy's a pilot. He's proud of my boy. And all of a sudden, his boy wants to be a girl. And that had to be devastating.
Yeah.
And honestly, I can't say I would have reacted any differently than he did.
I would just fall apart.
Yeah. So anyway, the title of the book comes from that talk that night. And
the book is Not Man Enough to Be a Woman. I'm just going to keep putting that name in your guys' head. Available on Amazon. Go ahead.
He had gone off on a diatribe about his 6 sisters. He has 6 sisters.
Mm-hmm.
And he was going on about how nurturing they are, how they have to put up and tolerate so many things, and how they're superior to men in so many ways. And he listed several. And in his frustration and anger, he just gritted his teeth and yelled, "You're just not man enough to be a woman."
Mm.
So when I wrote the book and needed a title, that popped back into my head, and that seemed to be the obvious choice for the
Because he
title.
was saying you were weak in your compromise.
Yeah, yeah. And I had already come to that conclusion too. Yeah, I totally gave into it. Yeah, a lot of people at the time, when I told them what I was doing, I said, "Oh, you're so brave to do this," and I would say, "No, I'm not. That's no. If I was so brave, I wouldn't do it. I would have been able to fight it." And I really took exception to, when people said that to me.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I totally gave into it. I was very weak, and that's something, of course, I'm ashamed of. Um,
Yeah, right, and rightly so. But you were going to kill yourself too. That was also a moment. It was the ultimate week.
yeah,
You were going to fall apart and die if you didn't do this thing. But doing this thing, it was just. Was it real good, or is it a placebo good?
well,
Is
at the time, yeah, I didn't really know, but over the next few years, I realized, yeah, this is good. This is keeping me alive. And once I made the transition, uh, I was successful. Within a year, nobody knew unless I told them. And
was
and
there
only
anything your dad could have told you that would have changed anything? And I'm asking this on behalf of my audience because we're
yeah,
coming up on Thanksgiving.
yeah,
Their kids and their grandkids are going to come home and say, "I'm gay," or "I'm non-binary," or "This is my same-sex boyfriend, girlfriend. I want to transition. And if you don't agree with me, you don't love me. If you loved me, you'd agree." Is there anything that your dad could have done then that would have made you feel loved without agreeing with you?
probably, but I don't know what it is. I can't say specifically what it is. I can say that the most loving thing you can do for anyone is to speak truth, whether it's in a secular situation or even a Christian situation. Um, now he reacted and was filled with anger and rage. Try not to do that because that
Yeah,
didn't end up well.
I'm just
And
saying,
yeah,
if nothing else, if all people can remember from your exchange at Thanksgiving, at the very least, don't react in rage.
rage. Yeah, uh, be loving, love your child or whoever unconditionally.
Mhm.
But I would say now, don't affirm it.
There you go.
Uh,
Now they're going to ask grandma and grandpa, "If you love me," because a soft form of affirmation was, did you have a name, a female name picked
yep,
out?
yep, yep. Maggie.
Maggie.
Well, that was
And
it. Was
did
a nickname
you,
from Margaret. Yeah, that was my legal name.
okay, from Margaret, and so that's a soft form of making someone use your pronouns is use your name, Maggie, which is a female name, to your dad. If you love me, you'll call me Maggie instead of William.
Well, that's what people say today. I never said that.
Right.
And in fact, I am not even sure if I had the full name when I told my parents about it. And I was
Okay.
there as
I'm saying
William
today, if someone
today. Yeah.
says,
Mm-hmm.
you will refer to, if I'm a guy, you will refer to
Yeah.
me as her
Yeah.
and remove the name that you gave me, Doug, and you will call me
Right.
Lisa or
Right.
Maggie or whatever. Should parents agree to either of those? Because the softer of those two is, give me my new name,
Mm-hmm.
not my pronoun. Give me my name, Maggie. Would you say that it would be wrong for a parent? It's not loving for a parent to call these trans people at the office when they request it by their new name.
Yeah, I think that would be wrong. I don't think it is right to affirm someone's delusions.
Okay,
If someone has anorexia,
that's right.
I don't think it is. I don't think it's right for a parent to say, "Yeah, you're too fat. You need to keep losing weight."
Right,
You don't want to
right.
affirm something like that. I think if there are people that feel they should have a disability, that they should be blind or they should be missing a limb.
Yeah.
Are you going to affirm that? and say, yeah, it's okay, go ahead and cut your arm off? No.
I mean, the medical establishment is there right now. If people feel like they have a limb disorder of an arm that shouldn't be there, they go to a doctor and the doctor removes it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But it would be similar to, and because we don't do it across the board, right? Like you said with anorexia, or say with alcoholism, you don't tell an alcoholic you're addicted to alcohol, therefore have more alcohol. But they do with trans.
Yeah. And why is trans so different than all of the other mental disorders listed in the DSM criteria that psychologists use? It's the only one that psychologists will actually affirm. You go to a psychologist for counseling for any of the other disorders listed in the thing, and they're going to counsel you and try to relieve you of that condition. They don't affirm it.
And it means that we're behind 30 years on therapies or group counseling where they could have been working on successful techniques to help people get out and cope, because instead they've decided to affirm it. So they're not even doing the research trying to help them reverse it.
Right.
Not doing the work. We don't have 30 years where it sets you behind by 30 years, you know, until they do start going, well, let's try this experimental idea of reverse transitioning people.
Now, there are some out there that are doing good work, but when they speak out, they get canceled. They get chastised. So there's very few that are willing to speak out because of the way they get treated.
Just for my audience, in case you're wondering why I'm so careful, is YouTube has a policy, it's down in all their conditions, where if I say anything that could damage someone who is trans, it could get your channel taken down or struck. So I have to be careful how I speak. I have to make sure that I'm not, I don't want to degrade them anyways. I don't want to harm anybody, but definitely I want to get the truth out without harming it. But if they gauge that you could be if this discussion could be harming someone, they could remove my entire career on YouTube. And this is my full-time job. So,
and I'm trying to be careful as well.
I appreciate it. Too, we can be careful together, but I do think the truth is coming through. Now we're 40 minutes in. I said I wouldn't keep you past 45 minutes. Can we go a little bit longer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because now I want to get into, we've talked about kind of those hang-ups and all the questions and all your bona fides and all that. You go to church for 30 years. You took communion, you were baptized or catechized or whatever. You listened to all the sermons, you participate in the choir. And your conclusion looking back is that you were never saved. And then you start listening to a different kind of message. You specifically mentioned John MacArthur, who I really love, but I've been listening to him for a long time. But what specifically drew you to look for something different from the Methodist, the softer Christianity that is the bulk of Christianity in America, that did not change
that are leading millions astray, by the way.
Leading millions astray. It's a placebo.
Yeah.
What made you turn from that and start moving to listen to these badass, these incredible preachers that are considered hellfire? I don't know about screaming or anything, but man, they do not cave on the truth.
Yeah. I had moved back to Florida in the mid 20-teens to bury my parents. They both died in March, 9 days apart. And my father and I had been estranged for 23 years.
Wow.
And he was terminal. He had lung cancer. And my mother was starting to get kind of sick herself. And I'm an only child, so I kept telling her, I said, listen, I'm ready to come down anytime, take care of you. My dad was in the hospital most of the time. My mother and I had been in touch regularly. She didn't approve of what I did either, but she loved her child, and we still
mom's
every
love
week.
is
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah. So the very strange thing happened. She finally agreed to let me come down and take care of her. And I was making arrangements. I was going to drive cross country, and I told her I'd be there in about 4 or 5 days. And I got a call the very next morning from my aunt, who told me my mother had died during the night.
No.
I said, "Wait, what? You mean Dad?" No, my mother. Totally unexpected. So I changed up my plans. I caught a plane. I got a couple friends involved to get me home. And my aunt had never met Maggie, and we had only reestablished communications a couple of years prior to that. Now, and she didn't want to see me as a dude, and at the time I was driving a truck.
Sure.
I had totally changed careers. What I typically wore was cargo shorts and scrub tops. My aunt and a nurse kept trying to get me to talk to Dad, but I didn't want to make things rough for him. I mean, I was the last thing he wanted to see, I figured. But I'll say that there was a deathbed reconciliation. He died 9 days after my mother did, and that's all in the book. It's quite a bit of detail there, and man, it's a heart-wrenching story, but it's well worth it. It's in the book. He never got to see me detransition. Never knew about that, but still there was that reconciliation.
Wonderful.
So I started going to church where my family was going, and after a few years, I was going regularly. I still did a lot of traveling, so I was kind of on again, off again at that particular church. But I heard this pastor talking about God's wrath and sin and hell and repentance. Sure. Yeah, I'd heard those terms. I knew they existed, but I never heard preachers talking about it.
Right.
It was always God is good, God is love, and it's all about you, and it's all feel good, just to get people in the door.
Yeah.
I never heard anybody talking like this before. And I started taking notice. And I went back in the archives and listened to all his sermons. And then on YouTube, I was stumbling onto MacArthur, Paul Washer, Vodi Balcom, R.C. Sproul.
Those are my people, yeah.
Todd Friel, Ray Comfort. I mean, just all these guys.
Yep.
And what they were saying was not necessarily what I wanted to hear at first.
Right.
They were throwing the law in my face. And
especially Ray Comfort. That's his big thing is you have to realize that you're guilty of the 10 Commandments before the good news. I used to do street witnessing with Ray Comfort in LA.
Wow. That's fantastic. I didn't know that.
Late 90s, early 2000s, I knew him.
Well, I had watched him do his thing with people on the street or at college, universities. And he how he does. He goes down 4 or 5 of those commandments, and he gets the subject to realize that, okay, he is a lying, thieving, blasphemous, adulterate at heart, and who's self-righteous and this and that. And he gets them to actually say that on Judgment Day, they're going to be guilty. And if they're guilty, heaven or hell. He gets them to realize themselves that it's hell.
And you realized it by hearing that?
I saw him do probably 100 of those things.
Right.
Before I realized he's talking to me. Oh my goodness. I started to feel convicted. Some of the other guys too, Todd Friel, Richard Radio, I mean, just all these guys. And I had also been studying apologetics and discernment. And I was realizing that these guys were telling me the truth.
Yeah.
And I really felt convicted. And probably in 2019-ish, I realized I'm doomed. And one of the big things that got me was actually one of the things that held me back was I wondered, if I do this, I knew what the step was. I had to repent.
Yeah.
And up until this point, I didn't even know what repent meant, really. But I had to repent and put my trust in Jesus. And if I do this, if I take this step, does that mean I'm going to have to detransition? Because secularly speaking, I was perfectly content living out the rest of my life as a woman.
Sure.
And it would be impractical because I was way more entrenched as Maggie than I ever was as William.
Yeah.
And some surgeries just can't be undone.
Yeah.
So that held me up for almost a year. But then it got to the point I just couldn't take it anymore, and I started seeing my sin in its true light, and I saw myself for what I was, and I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I didn't care what it takes. It didn't matter what the cost was. I broke down one night and I just was bawling my eyes out, and I cried out to God, and I confessed my sins, and I asked for forgiveness, and I repented. I told Lord, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to sin. I'd heard the phrase slave to sin. And man, that really made sense to me.
That's Romans.
I was a complete slave. I had no control over it at all. I wanted to be free of it. And it didn't matter if I had to detransition. And very shortly thereafter, my thinking went from, does this mean I have to detransition? It went from, oh man, I
Yeah.
have to. I want to. I hate this way I'm living. He really made me a new creation and gave me a new heart with new desires. I mean, I really despised the way I was living.
You repented.
Oh yeah.
You did it for real.
Yeah. And it was an amazing change.
So
good.
So the bad news is, to my audience, that's part of why I'm bringing you on. You can go to church your whole life and experience all of those sermons and not repent and live just fine in the church. That's a warning.
That was the key thing missing in my whole life.
You go to church difficult. And you're not getting the gospel.
Yeah.
You're going to church and you're hearing the good news, you're not hearing the bad news.
I had never heard the true biblical gospel till I got to this particular church. And by the way, if you, at the top of my Twitter page, can I say the...
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, I'll remind Jose to I'll send you the link and have him put a graphic up of your Twitter page where they can follow you. Wait a minute, I have it here. Hold on. Okay. There it is. Look. Let me do...
At the top of that page is pinned a video of my pastor telling my story at the end of a sermon he had just preached on repentance. It's about 6 minutes.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to show it to them here. Let's see if I can add the stage there. So there's your pastor doing this sermon here. And this is your Twitter page if they want to follow you.
Yeah, at WM Allen 2024.
Yep. And I'll put the link down in the description for that also.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. So,
but watch that video. It's a tearjerker. And the thing was, I was going to that church initially as Maggie, and that he baptized Maggie.
No kidding.
He didn't know.
Oh, he didn't know.
Nobody at the church
I was going to say.
No.
Should a church baptize a trans person?
Of course not.
Should they serve communion
because that's clearly
to a trans person?
No, but clearly that's unrepentant sin.
Okay.
But like I said, they didn't know. I was that good.
Wow.
There were women there that were asking me to join their women's groups, and I had friends. And I stopped going when I went back to work, and I was over the road again for a little while, and while all this was happening. And after I had completed the detransition last October, and I was finishing up the book about March, April, and of this year. I hadn't been to that church in quite some time, and I thought, I could just start over at another church.
Yeah.
But I thought, I really want to tell him what's happened, because he was key in leading me to Christ. He started it all off. So I wrote him a letter, 3-page letter, and 3 days or the day after, I got a call from him, and he was stunned as well. And in that letter, I asked him, first of all, I asked him for forgiveness, because he baptized me. First of all, I wasn't even a Christian at the time. And secondly, I wasn't who I said I was.
Yeah.
He didn't know I was trans.
Yeah.
And with no hesitation, he forgave me. He said, of course. And I asked him if he'd be willing to baptize me again as William. And he said yes.
Because he negated the last sacrament, it didn't count. So he said, this one will be for real.
Yeah, I had put him in an untenable situation too. Yeah. So I was hoping it was going to let him off the hook as well.
Okay, so
but like I said, he didn't know.
I kind of want to wrap on this, because when I watched your Twitter feed and I go, here is the trans of trans men, a guy who he was going to kill himself, and it was impossible for him to do without repentance. And I think of the things that I struggle with, where I go, God, why did you strap me with this? Why did you give me, say, lust, looking at porn, tobacco addiction, a pride, a coarse mouth, argumentative, non-gentleness. There's things that we believe are so deep in their nature. It's no different than you saying, I have to dress like a girl. I have to present as a girl to be happy. What's your message to them about what does the gospel do?
Well, the gospel just completely changed everything. It was healing. Once I had done that, I felt the Holy Spirit take up residence in me and changed me from the inside. I mean, I look at it today and I just think, what in the world was I thinking? As powerful as the compulsion was to transition in the first place, the need, the desire to detransition was 100-fold. And it was for a singular purpose, to glorify God. That was the only reason I wanted to do it. Nothing else mattered.
Any sin that that you say is too big, you're saying it's bigger than what Jesus did on the cross.
Yeah. No.
That what Jesus did on the cross was kind of trivial compared to how I feel about my sexual identity. It's kind of trivial. It's not as real.
Yeah. Grace is so much more powerful than sin.
Well, wonderful. I'm going to point one more time to your Amazon page to remind people to pick up this book. Here it is. There's a link in the description. Not Man Enough to Be a Woman.
Paperback, hardback, Kindle.
Paperback, hardback, Kindle. It makes great gifts. And some of you, again, we're coming up to the holidays. Families coming home. They're going to give you the big pressure question. Identify me by my chosen gender and my chosen name. And this will give you some wisdom. You could pass this thing along as a gift too, if there's people that might need it in your life. But I'd like to thank you, William Allen. I'm thankful that you were public enough about your testimony, first of all, to write the book, but also just in how you casually dropped that on Twitter. And I happen to be reading it. This is a divine appointment, and I don't believe in accidents.
Well, I mean, you saw the original post from the fellow asking the question, and so I keep an eye out for that. And it was actually another friend of mine, Eric Hoven, that saw it. It kind of brought my attention to it. And so, yeah, I'll chime in. I'll tell my testimony to anyone who will listen. And that is what I'm about these days. That's my life. That's my purpose.
My great prayer for you is that you remain holy, that the temptations that come would be supernaturally protected by God to give you courage, give you strength, and resist. And that's all we have for you on this giant episode of the Doug TenNapel Show.
Thanks,
this is
Doug.
where the happy patriots are, even the detransitioned, happy trans patriots. I'm Doug in Exile.